Hello, I'm Stuart Crainer. Welcome to our series of monthly webinars, Inside Ecosystems, brought to you by the Business Ecosystem Alliance. Our aim at the Alliance is to champion the very best in ecosystem-related thinking and research, but also to highlight the leading lights in the world of organizations who are putting ecosystems to work. This session brings together two leading-edge practitioners with a great thinker. From the world of practice, we have Sukanya Soderland, CSO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, a recent winner of a Zero Distance Award. And we also have Patricia Miron of Microsoft. Patricia is Integrated Strategy and Operations General Manager for the American Small, Medium and Corporate segment at Microsoft. And from the world of big ideas, we have the best-selling author Kaihan Krippendorff, CEO of Outthinker. As always, please share your observations and questions in the usual places, the comments on the side of the screen. So welcome to one and all. Perhaps I can start the conversation with you, Patricia. How do you describe your job?
So my job is really focused on our mid-tier and small business in the US. And, we have tens of thousands of customers. And we have multiple different sales models that we engage with those customers, all of which are highly connected to our ecosystem. All of our commercial products require some degree of subject matter expertise in order for them to be deployed, and hence why ecosystems are so important in our selling and deployment and even customer service process, because we need those subject matter experts, and we don't house them all inside. We actually house them through the ecosystem, through what we call our various different forms of partners.
So what do ecosystems mean for you and for Microsoft more generally? Is it in the vocabulary of Microsoft?
Yes. Every day we talk about partners. We think of our partners as an extension of our sales organization. And every angle of Microsoft's business, whether it's the hardware business, whether it's Windows consumer business, or whether it's the Azure commercial business, we always think about the ecosystem and what we call our partners, because they're the ones that allow us to actually expand our business in a way that is global, but also customize our business in a way that is highly technical and highly customized for all of the different consumers and usages of our products.
And is the kind of ecosystem way of thinking something that comes naturally in Microsoft, do you think? Is it something that's been around there a long time? You've held various positions at Microsoft and Intel before then. Is it a natural part of the Microsoft culture?
Yes, I think it's a natural part of Microsoft culture, but it's evolved over time. I think we tended to think about our partners as more of a distribution, our ecosystem as more of a distribution channel for us. But in the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, we've started to think about our partners as more of an extension of our business, and more of a necessary extension of our business. We tend to now think about our partners, what is their business model? How is their business model performing? Those things, particularly through the pandemic, have become just as important to our own financial performance. Our partners' performance has become equally as important to us, because we need them for their subject matter expertise in order for us to really deliver our full vision of our mission, right? To be the provider of technology, so that every person and every company in the world can live out their dreams and live out their full potential. That requires a lot of subject matter expertise that we can only find through the ecosystem.
I'm trying to think what Microsoft's original mission was: a computer on every desk in the world running Microsoft software.
Exactly.
But to some extent, what you're saying is that the pandemic encouraged you or enabled you to take a more inclusive perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's also allowed us to think more about, some of our partners are also customers, right? If you think about software companies, software service providers, they are both our customers because they're consuming our Azure product, our cloud products, but they're also our ecosystem partners. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what are their technological advancements that they want to deliver. How do we get them to that advancement? And then how do we help them deliver that to their customers? So it becomes a very circular relationship.
Kaihan,
I was just going to add, I would say, more so than most other companies, I think Microsoft was founded as an ecosystem. Right? If you look at the origin story of Microsoft, everybody wanted to make the hardware. You had Wang Computer and you had IBM, right? And everyone wanted to make software, but nobody wanted to do the layer in the middle, the operating system. And so I think that more so than other companies, Microsoft was originally founded to enable this ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just think, to Stuart's point, I think recently we've had a lot more empathy for our ecosystem, and that's the new vantage point that we're looking at and really thinking about that ecosystem and their viability and their business models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think empathy is an interesting word, isn't it?
Yes.
Because you would assume, historically, Microsoft's been a fiercely competitive organization, not renowned years ago for its empathy, but kind of empathy is at the heart of ecosystems, isn't it? Because it involves putting your kind of working more collaboratively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most challenging piece is that it's not just about your agenda and what you need. It is about what your ecosystem needs, right? And oftentimes what you originally think of as your ecosystem, as you start to expand that empathy, what you think of as your ecosystem changes, right? Like, as a tangible example, you would typically think like of Walmart as a customer for us. But, given the work that we've been doing and the role that we've played and how they've evolved their business model and how they're developing their e-commerce model and how they're adjusting their supply chain, I think they would almost think of us as an ecosystem player to them and much less of a supplier, right? And we were able to do that because of the level of empathy that we could have as a company to where Walmart wanted to go and what they wanted to do.
So it's almost like the historical language of like suppliers is almost redundant.
Yes.
We've been joined by people from South Africa, Turkey, Ireland, Switzerland, Poland, Holland, and Belgium so far. If anybody's got any questions, please send them over. We're also joined by Sukanya Soderland, who's the CSO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, who won a Zero Distance Award recently. It'd be nice to bring you in, Sukanya, because I know over the last couple of years you've worked very hard at getting closer to your customers. Can you tell us about what you've done in that area?
We have indeed, and our primary focus or objective has been really trying to follow a 3-step process. The first is developing a gristy understanding of the needs of our customers, and we've done that largely through human-centered design thinking processes and programs and approaches. The second is to try to find ways in which we can help solve some of the hassles that our members, our customers have. And in so doing, earn their trust. And then the third is really sort of the holy grail in healthcare in some ways, which is to say, after we've understood the needs and we have helped address some of the needs and the hassles and earn some trust, can we help influence behavior change? Because so much of healthcare is about behavior change. It's about the choices that people make in terms of, when they're not sick, what they eat and how much they sleep and how they manage their stress and whether they exercise and things of that sort. That's upstream. That's very important. And then downstream, which is where most of our activity historically has been focused, is all about getting our members the right care at the right place, the right time, the right way, the right price. And that requires stitching together the member or the customer journey across the healthcare ecosystem. And that's where providers in particular are really crucial, providers being hospital systems and physician groups. And this journey for us has been an ongoing one, but it started really more in depth in terms of breaking the mold of just thinking of our providers as sort of suppliers with whom we negotiate and pound fists on the table trying to trade network volume for price, to those with whom we partner, similar to the ways in which Patricia was talking about, because over a decade ago, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts pioneered what we call the alternative quality contract. And at that point, it was a path-breaking effort to say, let's try to shift the payment model with providers from one which has historically been focused on paying for volume, right, per transaction, where you can imagine a hospital CEO, CFO's role and logic is saying, get heads in beds, right, try to drive as much volume through, to paying for value and saying, how do we change the paradigm and focus more on outcomes? And that was really a very collaborative process in developing that new model with providers in our ecosystem here in Massachusetts over a decade ago. So we're on an evolving journey.
You're muted, Stuart.
You think
you haven't done this before, no?
No. Yeah. So thank you, Guy. Sukanya, I mean, you're a chief strategy officer. If I talked to a CSO like 10 years ago, or you're using completely different language like empathy, trust, collaboration, behavior change. And it's interesting, in healthcare, was not historically seen as an ecosystem. It was more seen as a series of discrete transactions. So viewing it as an ecosystem changes the role of your organization and everyone in the ecosystem.
Indeed, it does. And I think, two things I would point to that have sort of helped shift, or three things that have helped shift that evolution. The first, I would say, is the alignment of incentives. So much of the healthcare ecosystems and healthcare still operates in the fee-for-service world I referenced, but there's been an ongoing shift towards fee-for-value, which has made a difference because it's very hard to collaborate with partners in the kind of way that Patricia referenced if you're all trying to optimize for different ultimate objectives. So the alignment of incentives has been one key factor. The second factor I would point to has been the rise of technology and increased data liquidity. So healthcare has historically been very much shrouded, especially in the United States, very much shrouded in secrecy. The data has been locked up in different silos. And it was through the Healthcare Information Act and some other major pieces of legislation several years ago, with the onset of electronic medical records and such, that a lot of what sat on paper, a lot of the data elements that sat on paper, where you go into your doctor's office and fill out the same 12 questions on a clipboard, started to get digitized. That helped. But still, initially, even all that digitization was quite siloed. One instance of your electronic medical record at one hospital system could not correspond to that of another hospital system, even when there were sister hospital systems and under the same brand electronic medical record. And so more recently, what we've seen is an unleashing of data through the Data Interoperability Act and other forms of legislation that are prompting more fluidity and exchange of that information. And that's really important because if I'm not aligned on the underlying incentives and I'm not aligned and I'm not able to share data across different parts of the ecosystem, it's very hard to follow this approach. And then the third piece, Stuart, that I would say is that we've also started to see a shift in the landscape in terms of who the actors are and how they operate, what their business models are. And so historically, the business models in healthcare were much more functionally focused and narrow. You had your hospital systems, you had your health insurance companies, so on and so forth. What we're seeing now is that many of the players, especially the national for-profit publicly held players, are starting to take over the entire value chain. They are purchasing players across the entire ecosystem in analytics and pharmacy, in care delivery, and so on. And they're trying to stitch that together. Some of them are doing it by buying everyone. Some of them are doing it more through partnerships. And then you marry that with a flood of funding that is coming into this marketplace. This year alone, there's been over $20 billion of investment in digital health by the venture community. And then, of course, you have other players like big tech and others who are trying to get into healthcare because it's a big sector and it's growing and there's waste in the system. And so all of these forces, I would say, are conspiring to help move towards this different kind of model relative to a decade ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a shifting competitive landscape in virtually all industries. And I think historically what companies would have done was to batten down the hatches rather than to open the hatches and welcome collaboration. It always amazes me, Sukanya's story about getting closer to customers. It always amazes me that companies become estranged or distant from their customers. Kaihan, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, no, this is bringing up all kinds of thoughts. When we convene chief strategy officers like Sukanya and Patricia, we often engage with them and a thought leader. And one thought leader that has also been part of the Business Ecosystem Alliance, Tom Malone at MIT, has got this great framework that I think helps us think about it. It says that there are 5 ways that humans make decisions together. You've got hierarchies, you've got marketplaces, you've got communities. There's one that I'm forgetting. And then you've got ecosystems, right? And I think that the paradigm or the frame by which we used to think about a company operating with other companies was a little bit sort of like a hierarchy and a marketplace. Like I bought stuff, I added value to it, and I sold it. But as Sukanya says, with digitization, alignment of incentives, and companies also defining their business differently, not align a segment of the value chain, but maybe also a mission comes in play. I don't know, right? And I think that in healthcare, there's certainly a mission, and Microsoft done a great job of aligning to a mission that other members of the ecosystem can get behind, right? It starts shifting how we think about it. And so as that paradigm shifts towards ecosystem, maybe through community to ecosystem, there are a lot of entanglements that start becoming untangled. So yeah, that's what I'm hearing from the conversation.
Though in many ways, ecosystems create more entanglements. I always think because they involve and collaboration involves a degree of ambiguity and fuzziness around roles that wasn't there before. You're nodding, Patricia. Have you found that at Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, and we see it in so many different forms, right? So, I'm always surprised at how many different companies, different industries, different sizes of companies are actually influencing our engineering organization, right? And I mean, we have been deliberate now about allowing for that connection of some of our customers, particularly those that are being highly innovative and that are really sort of pushing on our solutions, allowing them to have that connection directly into our engineering organization. And they're having an impact on, what we're developing in our products. And I think probably the most visible way of seeing it is, we have a healthcare cloud. We have a financial services cloud. And a lot of those were actually born out of exactly what Sukanya is talking about, and that need to have the data integrated. And we were seeing lots of companies in the healthcare industry struggle with this independently. And we sort of deliberately said, let's not make it independent. Let's make it collaborative. And so the cloud brings that all together and, provides a lot of that glue. And we're doing that. I mentioned healthcare, but we're doing it in financial services. We're even doing it now in the nonprofit space because there's opportunity there. you know, that's really sort of creating a new form of ecosystem for us.
Yeah, interesting. Here's a question from Minor Empoyo, who's in Brussels, Belgium, for you, Patricia. Do you see business model discussions with your partners as a big industry level business model discussion where everyone plays its part?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. That is exactly what is happening around these industry clouds, is it looks at the industry as a whole and the large problems that are trying, you know, I think the problem du jour is, you know, supply chain, right? Well, we're having ecosystem level conversations about supply chain and how data and, you know, sort of a cloud compute environment that's ubiquitous can support that environment. So, yeah.
Yeah. A general remark from Minor as well. Business ecosystems seem to epitomize what Stephen Covey highlighted in his book, The Speed of Trust. Trust would be the currency of the new world. And I think trust among players in ecosystems. Yeah, I think that's actually what we're all kind of agreeing on. Here's a question for you, Sukanya. Do you think customers value companies that can build strong ecosystems over companies that just acquire their suppliers? So do you think there's a different perception because you're kind of increasingly geared around ecosystems? Do people perceive your company very differently, do you think?
It's a great question, because in theory, when one purchases all the suppliers, in theory, there should be less friction, right? So in theory, one should be able to provide a more seamless experience to the customer. And I think that's historically been what people have looked for. And so I think the bar is typically higher when you say, I can offer all these things to you by stitching it all together, but it's not all under my control. That being said, I think the rub oftentimes is that when one is purchasing their suppliers and trying to integrate it as one big hulking conglomerate, the challenge oftentimes becomes that one isn't able to necessarily access best of breed. And one isn't necessarily able to optimize for all the different parts along the ecosystem, because ultimately when you have everything under one umbrella, is typically you can only optimize on so much as one organization. And so I think increasingly there's now a recognition that people are looking for best of breed capabilities. They're looking for speed to market. They don't want to wait forever. They're looking for personalization. They're looking for flexibility. So, you know, the beauty of when you're in an ecosystem environment is that you can say, and partly it's because of the infrastructure and the APIs and such, and the cloud, as Patricia referenced, you can say, I can plug and play with different players. It's not that you've got one color, you know, you can get any color so long as it's black kind of phenomenon. And so I think the market is shifting in that way. But it does raise the bar in terms of saying, how do I ensure that I've got the right way of fostering the relationships, the right racy, if you will, so everyone knows who's on point for what, and you know, the underlying operating model, and the right way of ensuring that we can deliver in a seamless enough fashion for customers so it doesn't feel like a fractionated experience.
And presumably all this demands different skills from the managers involved in the ecosystem. What I mean, we've talked about empathy, trust, etc. I mean, it seems the kind of managerial landscape has changed as well.
Indeed.
Patricia, Sukanya?
Oh no, I'll just say very quickly, and then I'd love to hear Patricia's thoughts. I think, you know, increasingly it's moving away from the historical command and control, which if everything's under me, I can command and control and make it happen, to a much more collaborative drive for results in more of a transformational leadership mindset and way of working. And that's a shift. And it does require trust, as one of the attendees referenced, because absent the trust and the ability to move at the speed of trust, people are going to go to their corners. And if they retreat to their corners, they're not giving their best. They're slowing things down. And ultimately, it's sub-optimizing on the underlying value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Patricia.
no, I agree. I look at it as what has happened to us is that the point of innovation now is often at our customer team level, right? Because we're bringing in our subject matter experts, we're bringing in ecosystem subject matter experts to help a customer solve a complex challenge, right? Or to bring to life a complex strategy and evolution in their business. And so, you have to empower that innovation and that trust at the customer level. It was always more in a hierarchical level within your company. And now we see it really at the customer level. And we spend a lot of time at Microsoft thinking about how do we facilitate what we call that orchestration in front of the customer? And how do we ensure that, we've put the right subject matter expert into the dialogue, that right subject matter expert has enough information going in that they can, engage almost immediately with the customer, whether they're actually a Microsoft employee or they're a partner employee or an ecosystem employee. And what information do they not need, right? Because our customers are sharing with us a lot of very private information. And so we also have to be very careful about, are we giving our ecosystem, giving them information that they don't need, that could potentially be used in a way that's not helpful to the customer? And so, the trust portion of this is very complicated because it's both trust in your ecosystem, but it's also harder in trust with the customer. And how do you manage those two things also has to be factored into it.
Yeah, interesting points. The Anindya Roy comments, ecosystems allow a company to maximize value extraction from the value created by the ecosystem partners by supporting them to create that value. It's a bit tautological, but I think the truth is there somewhere that ecosystems help everyone generate value. What about the metaphor of orchestration? I like that as an idea. Kaihan.
Well, I was just going to comment on that. And this is a subject that's been coming up a lot with the chief strategy officers that are part of the network, is how do you know how much is right and by what method you extract or capture the value of an ecosystem? Like, you could step back and look at an ecosystem and say, there's the price at which contributors to the ecosystem, suppliers, are willing to sell. And then there is a price at which customers or users of the end product of the ecosystem are willing to buy. And the difference between that is the total value created by the ecosystem. That has to get divided between customers, because we're creating value for customers, got it, suppliers, employees, and also society and all the other players, And the question of, like, how much can you capture is a complicated one. And many ecosystem creators, maybe they're more platform companies. I'm thinking the United States of, like, Uber Eats, for example, got into a lot of trouble because they were trying to extract more than what the restaurants that were selling through them could afford to pay them, because restaurants were actually losing money and they were extracting more value. And then you also have societies that will say, hey, it's not fair that they're extracting as much value. So I think it's complicated. I think ecosystem can maximize value by creating that coordination. But does it mean you can extract more value if you're doing it as part of an ecosystem? I don't know. I don't know. And that this speaks a little bit to, I agree with what Sukanya is describing, as that you don't have to kind of integrate and acquire to be able to create the value. And yet you also see in some places the opposite trend, SpaceX said we couldn't buy a rocket at a reasonable price. So what did they do? They built their own rockets, and they hired the people and built, and everyone thought they were crazy. They didn't know what they were doing. And the big competitors kind of poo-pooed them and laughed at them, but they were able to prove that by doing it themselves, they could produce a rocket at a much lower price point, right? And then that inspires other players to adapt. So those are two really interesting questions. How much can you extract, and do you control, or do you operate at arm's length?
mean, you're kind of suggesting that ecosystems need to be managed, that they have their limits. I mean, Patricia talked about clouds. You can have lots of clouds, but I'm English, and I know what happens if you have lots of clouds. It rains very, very soon.
Yeah.
So they're not they're not limitless. You need in the sense that they need careful management and to be nurtured.
I think it comes to the theory of the firm, which says that when the internal transaction cost is lower than the external transaction cost, if you have a factory and people go to the factory and every day you negotiate a new fee with them and sign a new contract, there's a lot of friction there. So instead, you make them an employee. And so that internal transaction cost becomes lower. But I think that, a lot of what Patricia and Sukanya are pointing to is that it's the cost of transacting outside of the firm is starting to come down. And so ecosystems will start taking over what was originally controlled. But it's not a black or white.
Yeah.
Some places it makes sense, some places it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think, to Kaihan's point, I mean, I think that subject matter expertise, right, becomes really a currency in an ecosystem environment. Time and time again, I see, ecosystem players with us who have deep expertise. They're the ones that are able to extract a lot of value out of an ecosystem environment. One, because they know what they're looking for, and so they're pretty prescriptive with us on who are their customers and who they do and do not want to get engaged with us, in what kinds of conversations. But then, when they come in, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're very talented in what they're trying to do. And so I think that is, to really perform well in an ecosystem, having that degree of subject matter expertise is really important.
So ecosystems are a way of cultivating and specialist knowledge and collaborating with true specialists.
Yeah. And I think we tend to think of this idea of specialists as kind of a technology thing. But, I see, the complexities of other industries. I see that subject matter expertise, deep subject matter expertise, becomes increasingly important, not just in the technology space. And Sukanya, I'm sure you see this all the time. There's a lot of subject matter expertise in a lot of angles in the healthcare industry.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think you captured it well, Patricia. It's about the subject matter expertise. I think it's also about the data and the ability to really mine the data in newfound ways, and to be able to anticipate what's coming next and around the bend and be more personalized as a result of the learnings from the data. And I think it's also about a willingness to redesign internal processes. A lot of what we're talking about is about changing how things work and how the work gets done end to end. And, that requires a lot of workflow management and alignment on who does what within the company and across the ecosystem. And that's hard. And then, of course, there's the culture shift pieces as well that Stuart referenced, because it's a different mindset. It's definitely a different mindset.
And have you encountered many cultural obstacles along the way, Sukanya?
Well, I think whenever one tries to embark on change, it's always difficult, right? We all like change so long as it doesn't happen to us. And so there's, I think, a real challenge with human nature relative to change. I will say, and Kaihan referenced this earlier, many folks in healthcare are very mission-oriented. And there's a social impact dimension to what we're trying to do. In Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts case, we are also a not-for-profit. And so as a result of that, when you can get folks aligned on what the ultimate objective is, and the mission is, it's easier to paint the inspiring vision for what we're trying to do, and therefore to help people come along the way and see what role they can play in participating in that ultimate vision.
Yeah, if I could add to that as well, if we look at society's most impactful innovations, the creation of the internet, MRIs, advance in solar energy, when those innovations have a big societal component, the society benefits with them, that's where you often see these ecosystems emerge around them. Those were never created by one organization. They were spontaneously collaborated on. And I think that social mission is a critical ingredient for activating the ecosystem.
There's an interesting point from somebody on LinkedIn saying balancing the interests of partners in an ecosystem is crucial. Good governance can provide more and better opportunities. Only with a balanced governance can the ecosystem really flourish and provide shared value to all the partners. And I think that's probably an underestimated element, the governance of an ecosystem, which is something we're kind of getting to in the discussion. Does that ring any bells, Patricia?
Yes, it absolutely does. I mean, we have governance that happens literally quarterly, both internally to ask the questions of, are these the right partners with the right subject matter expertise? Are we doing a good job of orchestrating them into the right deals at the right time? But then, we've also recently really looked at our partnering organization and made sure that we are also facilitating a conversation with our partner that asks them the question, is this beneficial to you? Are you getting the margins out of this that make sense for you? What do we need to change? So we've been much better about not having it be a one-sided governance, but actually having it be a two-sided governance.
Sukanya, does that sound ring with your experiences?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, there are a few levels to this. There's the governance level of who's responsible and accountable and consulted and informed, sort of the RACI, who does what the right escalation pathways are, and all those kinds of things across the various parties. There's also the desire to empower, and Patricia was referencing this earlier, empower the teams on the ground who are joint teams doing the work to make the right calls with the speed and the facility and the agility that's required and not have to run everything up the chain. And so getting that balance right is important. And then finally, I would say there needs to be an alignment of top to top. So I find when these arrangements work the best is when oftentimes the CEOs have aligned up front and they've given direction and guidance to their teams. And so, it's easier then to facilitate the kinds of moves that are required and also address the challenges that are inevitable in any of these arrangements as they arise.
Yeah, there's a danger. I always think that ecosystems are seen as kind of theoretical and philosophical, but in fact, they involve hard business decisions and hard business governance to make them work. Nicole makes a point. Do you think partners' alignment within an ecosystem depends on the technology used to create value, or does technology follow ecosystem organizations? Chicken, egg, ecosystems.
I mean, certainly ecosystems have existed before many of the technologies did that we use, right? But then certainly technologies create new possibilities, new ways of, getting jobs done that we used to use other ways. So maybe they facilitate ecosystems. But I think it's a mistake to say that ecosystems are suddenly possible because of the internet or because of digitization.
Yeah, I would say they inspire each other every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ecosystems are universal and timeless, I guess. There've been ecosystems forever, but they weren't necessarily called ecosystems. So where does all this go? Do you think? If looking ahead in 3 or 4 years' time, how do you think your ecosystems will be different? How do you think they will evolve? How will that change the way you do business? Do you think? Sukanya, where do you see it going with your organization?
Well, I think the aspiration for us is really to serve as the trusted ally of our members, where we're earning the right to guide them to the right care, right place, right time, right way, and to bring into the ecosystem next generation innovative providers who are shifting the way in which care is being delivered, bringing more care into the home, bringing more care on the go, helping to arrest acute episodes of a disease before it might actually emerge. And so that's really our goal. And we can't do that alone as a health insurer. It requires that we stitch together and curate this broader ecosystem and build the underlying trust with our members to help guide them, build the trust with providers, and align the incentives to facilitate it, develop the underlying data and technology infrastructure to enable us to really activate people in the right way, right time, and so forth. So that's what our hope and our aspiration is. And it's really in service of our broader mission, which is the relentless pursuit of affordability, quality, experience, and an unparalleled consumer experience with an equity lens.
What about from your perspective, Kaihan? Where do you think the trends around ecosystems are pushing us?
What I hope is that they can lead us to more of a purpose-driven society. There's this theory of universal ownership theory, which says that an investor maybe owns an oil and gas company, but they also own an insurer. And that investor now is dealing with the negative externalities of selling oil because their insurance company is now making more claims. And so as we start having more of these independent sectors and players in sectors depend on each other, hopefully we can develop whatever that layer is of like consciousness or awareness that takes those externalities and actually optimizes for all of them. So I hope that it will just drive us to a kind of a future of better business.
Patricia, where do you see things going at Microsoft with ecosystems?
I think they're just going to become a larger and larger piece of our business, right? As you think about, the vision that Sukanya has laid out for Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? Her company is going through an evolution that is in many ways requires technology to support it. And, if our mission is to help bring that to life, we can only do that if we have the right level of subject matter expertise, and we can't house that all internally. So as companies like Sukanya's get more and more creative and more ambitious about what they want to accomplish and how they want to show up in the world, it's going to require that we continue to improve our products, but we also support a very healthy and innovative ecosystem at the same time, because we can't be the subject matter expert on absolutely everything. It's just not possible. So, for us, the ecosystem is an investment that will continue to grow, continue to be more important. And, what we consider part of our ecosystem, we believe will just continue to expand more and more over time.
It's one of the criticisms of leadership generally, that historically leaders were seen as having the answers to everything, and a sign of weakness was not knowing the answer. And it's a similar organizational thing, isn't it? That you were saying that having the humility to realize that you don't house all the world's experts is the first stage. There's a couple of questions we'll just finish on. There's a very difficult question for Kaihan, actually, which I think, but it's come from Ank in Holland. Do you recognize the business case dilemma of value chain ecosystems? The parties who are benefiting are not always the ones who are investing. What type of options do you see to address this dilemma?
Yeah, I think that's always, it makes for an unstable ecosystem when people are creating more value than they're extracting, or they are extracting less value than their best alternative to not participating in the ecosystem. And those internal dynamics, I don't really know what the solution is, but that I think is really the ultimate dilemma of whether an ecosystem is sustainable or not.
And one question, Michael from South Africa. I'm sorry, I ignored your previous point, Michael. It seems we are discussing two different types of ecosystems, where one is a business supplier type ecosystem and the other is more a service development ecosystem. The approach to their development is different, requires a different level of collaboration. Do you see it that way? I suppose the different levels of collaboration is one of those management decisions and judgments you have to make all the way in this area. Sukanya, you're nodding your head.
No, I agree. I see it as a bit of a continuum. And oftentimes it may start as the former, business to business kind of exchange, if you will, and collaboration. And ultimately, if the ecosystem is successful and the partnership is successful, typically you are creating new services as a result of the collaboration. And so I do think there's a spectrum. And there may be some who leap in right away looking to get onto the right-hand side of that spectrum from the get-go. But oftentimes in these partnerships, because they are quite complex, and we did reference governance, and ceding control is always hard, it is helpful to have some small wins up front, and it is helpful to demonstrate to each of the respective organizations that it can work and build trust within the organizations. So I do find that taking a stepped and staged approach can oftentimes be more fruitful in gaining momentum and achieving a broader vision over time.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. A really interesting discussion. I think what I take away from it is the willingness of you personally and your organizations to kind of wrestle with this complexity, that to accept that management and organizations isn't a simple matter, and it relies on very complex and subtle relationships. So thank you, Sukanya, thank you, Patricia, and thank you once again, Kaihan, for his wisdom and insights as always. And thank you everyone who's joined us from throughout the world, and thank you for your questions. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.